Hello everybody, and thanks for joining us this afternoon for this webinar from Site Visibility. It's Kelvin Newman, the Strategy Director at Site Visibility, and I'm going to be talking about 7 frequently asked SEO questions under the broad sort of topic of all you wanted to know about search and more. We've got the site, the ability for you guys to ask questions, which we can see as we go through proceedings, but we've also got some time dedicated to questions and answers at the end of the webinar. So please do ask a few questions, because that's really what we want this webinar to be about, to be interactive, to be useful, and hopefully answer your questions as best we possibly can. But to kind of steer the webinar, I've taken 7 of the questions that we get asked most frequently at Site Visibility when we're working on SEO campaigns, but also through our Internet Marketing podcast, where we've been asked questions. We have a Q&A episode once a month there as well, so kind of tapping into some of those most frequently asked questions, and particularly those that have started to kind of rise up the agenda over the last 2 or 3 months or so, some of the big changes that Google have been going through, particularly most recently. So, on to my first question. How long does SEO take? Well, the short answer for that, and not the answer that I'm sure many of you will appreciate, is it depends. And it depends on all number of different varieties of factors. Now, on one level, budget tends to help, so that the amount of, more often than not, when you're working on an SEO campaign, whether it's an internal one or one where you're working with a third-party agency, effectively time is the limiting factor. So it's the amount of resource that you have to work on that, or the resource of the people who are best qualified to do that. So it's not simply more time always equals better results, but more of the right time from the right people working on the campaign tends to have an impact on it. So how long does SEO take on that front? Well, it helps, but you can actually spend too much, and there's a real danger at the moment particularly that you can be too aggressive. And sometimes if you're investing too much time and effort into trying to get your website to shoot up the rankings, you can often find yourself that you have gone to perhaps too much effort and have perhaps set off some signals or red lights where in terms of your performance, because you're changing too much too dramatically. But generally speaking, we tend to find that if you aren't seeing results after about 3 months or so of working on a dedicated campaign, that's the point when you need to be starting to ask yourself questions about whether you're taking the right approach. That doesn't mean that if you start a campaign and you want to rank #1 for mortgages, you're going to be ranking there after 3 months. But after 3 months, across a portfolio of keywords that you're watching, some of them highly competitive, some of them less competitive, you would hope to start to see some positive movement of some way, shape or form. Now that doesn't mean you're going to be ranking #1 for all your money terms, but it certainly means if you were ranking in 60th place, you might have moved to 50th place, or if you were in position 11, you might have started to make the move to position 10. And it's all about that kind of general sense of movement. And if after 3 months you're not seeing improvements in terms of your rankings, in terms of the traffic you're seeing in Google Analytics that's been attributed to natural search, and you're not seeing more conversions that you're measuring in Google Analytics from natural search, you've got to start to ask questions. But you're not going to see business changing shifts in the amount of traffic or the amount of rankings that you're going to have in a 3-month period. It can even take years in certain situations as well. And of course that entirely depends upon how much time and effort you're investing into the campaign, how clever you're being with that campaign, and ultimately what your competitors are up to as well, and how long they've been established. So the best bet we find is often to spread your risk. So SEO can take at least 3 months, often 6, more often 9, to really start to make a dramatic impact on your bottom line, as it were. So what we tend to recommend is don't put all your eggs in one basket. SEO is a long-term campaign that requires a build-up over a period of months and often even years if you're working in some of the most competitive sectors. So what do you do in the meantime? You spread your risk. You invest in things like pay-per-click advertising, which can give you instant access to people who are looking for your products or services. You start to look at performance-related display, which can be very good at driving instant lead generation to your website as well. And also look at the other mix like social media as well, which also tends to take a long time to really build up a head of steam. But if you've kind of got like a spread portfolio where you're investing the total money in your marketing campaign across a number of channels, you're in the best case scenario for reducing the risk of you missing out on any traffic, and also benefiting from the things that are perhaps more expensive but instant, whilst investing in some of the other things that take a little bit longer to achieve their full benefits. The next question, and I mean this is one that even there's changes and stuff happening as we speak today. So the question is, should I stop building links with articles, directories, infographics, etc.? And infographics is perhaps one of the ones that's most interesting up there, because just yesterday on Search Engine Land there was an interview with Matt Cutts where he started to talk about the potential for infographics being kind of overused as a link building technique, and potentially the possibility that Google might start to treat them slightly differently from other links. Well, Google may appear to be targeting certain link building methods, but I don't think that's what it appears to be. That's not necessarily the actuality of what's really happening. Instead, they're actually targeting poor links. They're not necessarily worried about, did this link come from an article? Did this link come from a directory? Did this link come from an infographic? They're far more concerned about the nature and quality of that link, rather than the name that we as search marketers or we as digital marketers gave us in order to give that. And that's what Google are far more interested in, the quality of that link, as opposed to, whether it's come from the name we gave it when we put that on our project plan. So don't worry about the method that you get to link. Worry more about the intent and the outcome. So Google generally seem to be on a path towards providing less value from links which are perhaps created purely for SEO reasons. And more often than not now, the links that are going to provide you with the most value from an SEO perspective are those which exist for reasons above and beyond SEO, even though you are able to get some SEO value from there as well. Now the question I get asked quite a lot off that is kind of, well, you say, Google are targeting poor links. What indeed is a poor link, and how do you kind of assess the quality of that? Well, there's some great blog posts out there that tell you how you can numerically look at your backlink portfolio and try and assess the relative quality of them. But that can be a very effective way if you've got to deal with tens of thousands of links and try and assess which of those are the ones which are highest or lowest quality. What I tend to find is your gut feel as a regular internet user will probably be a far better indicator than any number of metrics that you can look at. Look at that website, look at that link to yours, and your gut feel will tell you if that's a good quality link or not. I mean, the analogy I often try to use is to say, well, if you had to present this link that is pointing at your website to your managing director or to your marketing director, and say, have a look at this link and try and explain and justify why you've created it there. If you feel a little bit embarrassed by that link, that's probably a sign it's a poor quality link. If it's something you're proud of, that you're really pleased that you can, that anyone, even if they don't understand SEO, can see that that's a good quality page, that they are the types of links that really make a difference to a search marketing campaign. And they're worth hundreds, thousands of these lower quality links that you might find from less reputable sources online. Next question on my list. Where should I spend my SEO budget? Well, the simple answer to that is content, content, content. The old adage, content is king, is probably one of the biggest cliches out there. But it is a cliche because there's a certain element of truth in it. And particularly the way that the link-based algorithms seem to be moving. It seems to reward those that have high-quality content. And content in the broadest possible sense. When most people talk about content, they're actually using it as a kind of a shortcut for text-based content. Now, that's not the only type of content that's out there. Video is important. Slide shares are important. Webinars are important. Podcasts are important. All these, white papers, blog posts, all these different types of content that exist, they're all increasingly important in the success or failure of any campaign that you're working on. But it's not actually that simple. Actually, I've seen more and more websites that have invested heavily in content marketing, have a pretty well-rounded content strategy, but haven't really benefited as much as they could do from that investment that they've made. Now, this is kind of the process that I always recommend you go through. First of all, you need to sort out all of your major on-site technical issues, and they should always take precedence. The way you can look at this great content as the icing on top of a cake, but if you've not got the bare ingredients to the cake there, it doesn't matter how good the icing is if the cake itself doesn't taste very good in the first place. And also, you need to be realistic that good content takes time. If we're producing a piece of content for a client that we really think is going to attract high-quality links, it can take time. It can take time for a number of reasons. One is because, it's far more time-consuming to produce a piece of content that's going to do well socially and virally and that people are really going to find useful than something you've merely created to just about seem readable enough to get syndicated on an article site. So instantly, you've got more of a challenge there as well. But as you find these more creative pieces of content, more and more people within a company are going to want to be involved in the consultation process, but also sign off of that as well. So there's a learning curve there that we've been through over a period of years as SEO has progressed, where we've learned that the better the quality of content, the more realistic you have to be about the amount of time it takes to get that produced and signed off. And that's a tough challenge for some people who are kind of traditional link builders who like to be entirely in their own little silo and getting on with things. SEO is far more about collaboration now than it perhaps was 3 or 4 years ago in the past. And finally, good content without promotion and outreach is, I call it the saddest missed opportunity in digital marketing. There's nothing ever more disappointing than you've gone through that process, you've won the battle of, convincing the stakeholders within a business that content is important. You've taken the time to, involve everybody who has a say in this piece of content. You've got sign off from everyone. Then you put it up and just assume that that will get you great rankings on its own. That isn't enough. Great content helps you do link building. It helps you attract links naturally. But it's all about outreach and knowing who it is. So what we often try to do and recommend is actually you should know 3 or 4 people who you want to link to your piece of content before you even start producing it. And you're kind of building it with those 3 or 4 blogs in mind that it's the type of content they can't help but link to. And that's the best approach that we find there. So don't just build the content, hit it live on your site and assume that you'll rocket up the rankings. You need a follow-up plan. You need a promotional plan for each of those pieces of content to get it in front of the right type of people who have the power to link to your site, who have the power to socially share it and seed the journey that you hope this great piece of content will go. That can be much easier if you've already got a mailing list or already got a strong social media following. But if not, that doesn't mean you can't be successful with a great piece of content. A question that I get asked, quite frequently, which is kind of a bit scary, is link building dead? Particularly as that's kind of one of the fundamental skills and one of the fundamental elements of any search marketing campaign. Now, largely, this kind of comes about from a number of case studies, which have sort of studies that have been released recently. The most recent and probably most talked about was one by a company called Searchmetrics, who actually have been a sponsor of Brighton SEO in the past. And they released a report which talked about the correlation between social signals, and I use social signals in inverted commas there deliberately, where they talk about kind of Facebook likes or shares on Twitter or Google Plus, shares of the content, plus ones, and kind of this broad sense of social signals. And many of these recent studies have shown a correlation between content which gets shared a lot on social media and content which ranks well in the search results. And instantly the headline on the blogs and the company, the B2B publishing world is social signals, more, correlate better than links, and are a better indicator of whether a website will perform in the search results. Well, the first thing that I think most of the studies themselves make clear, but a lot of the reporting of those studies don't, is that correlation doesn't mean causation. So put simply, just because a piece of content is well shared on a social network and has these strong social signals, that doesn't mean that's the reason why that content ranks highly. In fact, there's an equally valid assumption that content that ranks well in the search engines does well in social media, and we don't assume that. We don't assume just because Google likes it, that means everyone in the world on Facebook's going to like it as well. It doesn't work like that. It just shows that there's a connection between the two. And I think what's really important about that is not actually really thinking about, the question isn't how can I get more Facebook likes for my my content I produce, how can I get more people to tweet about it. It's more, I know if I produce the type of content that does well on social media, it will probably do well in SEO as well. So use that to inform your strategy. So look at your competitors' content and actually understand which of their, they've got a blog, they publish one blog post a week, one blog post a day, 5 a week, 20 a month, and you're trying to learn from what they're doing. Look at which of those pages has the best social signals associated with it, the most popular on social media, and then use that to inform your content strategy going forward. I'm having a bit of a coughing fit here, I do apologise. There's actually an argument as well that as link building becomes harder, it might actually become a better ranking signal. Because what you'll find is that as there's fewer and fewer links out there, and those that are good quality become harder and harder to find, that might make it a slightly better signal to look at as well. And interestingly as well, a quote from just the 5th of June from Matt Cutts, who is one of the most public-facing figures in Google, is to say that links are a dead signal is wrong, and it would be wrong to write the epitaph of links just yet. The fact is that, simply put, link building is still a big part of what determines whether a site is successful or not. Now, social media needs to be integrated into your campaign, and you need to try and work social media and link building together. But if you ignore link building on its own and just build the websites, you'll be fine. You won't have a problem there as well. So you need to really concentrate on how you can get the two to work together on that front. Okay, so the next question on my list is, how many links should I be getting, and what type of links should I be building? I think an important lesson that I always try to think about is the idea that Google isn't the enemy. It's not Google we're trying to beat when we're trying to get a website to perform better in a search engine. It's actually your competitors you're looking at. Google simply set the rules of the game. So every decision that you make in your campaign should be made with an understanding and an appreciation of what your competitors are doing. So when you're deciding, oh, I should launch a blog, oh, I should launch a Facebook page, that should be related to what is going on in the competitive marketplace. So know where your competitors are strong, react defensively to that. If they have lots of links from white papers that they produce, you need to also be producing white papers just to keep on an even keel with them. If they've got lots of links from directories where they've been, they've signed up for these high quality directories dozens of years ago, you need to do that as well. Additionally, understand where they're weak in their backlink portfolio as well. If they don't have a high number of links pointing to their category pages, all of their links are pointing to their homepage, perhaps that's an opportunity for you to perform better than them. So understand the areas of their backlink portfolio where they've got weaknesses and try and really take advantage of that as well. So if all of your competitors are taking one very particular approach to link building, perhaps they're all doing infographics, maybe guest posts is an area where they'll be weak, and you can therefore perform a little bit better than they do in that area as well. And act defensively. And the days of bad links are dead, pretty much. There's very little value to be had now in kind of high volume, low end link building, which was, always part of the mix. And, different agencies and different practitioners kind of used a different ratio of, not the greatest quality links in the world, but they had an impact. In fact, actually, I think the days of good links are increasingly looking numbered as well. And what you actually need to be doing is concentrating on amazing links. And this is kind of quite a shift in mentality for a lot of people involved in link building who are kind of very, goals and number orientated. So it is kind of, how can I get 100 more links this month? Now, in fact, what we're finding more and more with our clients is 1 or 2 really high quality links from really good websites, kind of PR links almost, so where public relations, building a relationship with a journalist, they can have a profound impact on a search result. I mean, I was talking to a colleague of mine, Martin, today about a project we're working on where they had, a traditional consumer pub magazine, their website, they linked to one of their products, that product, which we hadn't actively been targeting that highly, but because that product had now got an internal link from a really high quality website, that story was on the homepage for a number of days, that shot up the rankings. And it's those types of, you're not going to be able to get hundreds of those links every month. That's just not feasible. That's just not scalable. But what you'll find is 2 or 3 of those links can have a disproportionate impact on your ability to rank. Okay. My final question, and perhaps one of the trickiest ones, and one that I can't really do justice in a single slide, but how do you predict search traffic? Well, if you're looking for an accurate and reliable forecast of how well a search campaign is going to do, you're probably going to be disappointed. Over the last couple of years, we've been working on a predictive model to indicate broad ranges of potential SEO success, and we've been very pleased with that. But we will still state with absolute certainty that this is only kind of a forecast. It's a general prediction of the potential success of a campaign. It isn't a hard and fast indication of what will happen in the future of a campaign. Now, how do we go about doing that? Well, we start by taking your current ranking, so understanding where your traffic is currently coming from. We then estimate the potential improvements that we could find in those rankings. So say in position 11, we think with a 6-month campaign of this scale and complexity, we could get you to position 7, say, as an example. And we do that across the most important keywords and take a general rule across some of the longer tail key phrases as well. We then estimate the click-through rate that you would get from those improved rankings. And we either use tools like Google Keyword Traffic Estimator, which wildly overestimates in certain situations and wildly underestimates in other situations. But we find it most useful where you are already getting traffic. So we look at the phrases which are already sending you traffic when you're in position 10 and estimate what it would send you if you're in position 5 or position 3 or position 1 and so on and so forth. We then apply this to traffic data, as I just said, and we then multiply that by your conversion rate or your average order value. And this is the step that I think is really important to do when you're trying to predict search traffic. Is merely saying your search traffic will go up by 100%, 50%, 125% isn't really that meaningful. Far more useful is to say, well, if we get this 100% increase in traffic, what's that going to actually lead to in terms of sales or in terms of leads that we generate from the website? Which needs, it's worth stating that that's not foolproof, and we kind of have an upper end and a lower end, and we generally feel that we get pretty accurate on that. But you have to bear in mind with any of these forecasts, it is kind of a calculated guess, and it's fundamentally a guess and an estimate rather than a prediction of what will happen in the future. But it's a good indicator of potential and helps us kind of understand that on some occasions there are campaigns where simply the sums don't add up. So you might find, for example, that if we were to rank number 1 for all the key phrases that we were potentially targeting, the traffic would be so low with the average order value that it just wouldn't justify potentially the effort that you have to go to. And that's what sensible search people will do. They'll understand if the potential is actually there. And in other cases, it might well be we discover that there is this huge untapped potential there that we didn't realize about. So actually it's worth investing potentially more in that campaign because the upside of that is that much higher. And our final question, how do you measure ROI? Well, in principle, it's actually a fairly simple equation. You take your return, so what you've made from the campaign, you minus your investment that you've made, and then divide that by your investment. So that's kind of the simple answer to that. In fact, actually, it's far more complex to measure return on investment. We always try to, but it is far more complex. So, for example, the first question, are you measuring the return based on the profit from those sales or the actual revenue that you're making? Revenue is probably easier to do in terms of if you're using Google Analytics, for example. But profit is much harder because you might have different margins on different products. You might have different margins on different products at different times because when one item you pay £8 for but next month it costs you £7 and you're still selling it for £10 every month, there's a difference there in the profit you've made. That makes it that much harder to make return on investment calculations. There's also the big question that we get faced with quite often, and one that we always try to report on is it an incremental sale or lead, or is it just the total? So it doesn't matter how good a campaign has been overall if its improvement is relatively little. So it's a kind of, you actually need to be talking about the improvement in a campaign from a benchmark of where you were previously last year. So actually you could have a campaign that, the sales aren't incremental, or is there cannibalization going on there as well? And also, what about cross-channel attribution? So it might well be that search is the last touch, or was it the first touch, or was pay-per-click part of the equation? And actually, does display have an impact on how your natural search performance, turns out into figures at the end of the month? And the fact is, it's all complex. Now, it doesn't mean you can't break it apart, but it does make the issue of trying to boil down an entire campaign into one number potentially a little bit difficult. And also, is seasonality or discounts or sales having an influence as well? And what about the opportunity costs of more immediate campaigns as well? So are you kind of thinking about, well, actually our return on investment might be X, but if we'd have spent that on performance display, would we have got a different result? And would that return be slightly different there as well? So with all those caveats, you might struggle to find the perfect answer, but that doesn't mean that you should kind of ignore the return on investment. And just because you can't accurately, measure it to the final decimal point doesn't mean that it isn't worth doing. And that simple step of including a, the question of what the investment is. There's no sound going through. Yeah? Okay. Sorry about that. I think we may have had a slight sound issue for a second there on that front. Hopefully I'll come back now. But I'm just summing up on my final point, really, that basically you can't really accurately measure the success or failure of a campaign if you're not bearing in mind what it's costing you. So a campaign might have had 100% increase in leads, But how many did that 100% increase in leads, what revenue and profit did that lead to? And what revenue and profit did that lead to once you bared in mind the fact that you actually had to pay an additional cost to that? So really you need to understand what the investment is to really appreciate the success or failure of a campaign. So, my big questions that I have there, the big questions, and I'll try and answer them fairly simply. How long does SEO take? It depends. But actually after 3 months you can normally get a good idea, but 12 months is far more typical for a successful failure of a campaign. Link building tactics are changing, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't discount any method at all. You can't really predict search traffic, but you can get an idea. And you can measure ROI, but potentially it's quite difficult to do so as well. So I don't know if we've had any questions there, particularly from the audience, that are worth us asking there as well. But I think I've got one here from a guy called John. And John asks, do you think that SEO as is potentially something that's going to be around in 5 or 6 years' time? And I think the answer to that, John, is yes, there will be a place at SEO. What it will probably be part of an interdisciplinary team, and that's what we're tending to find as well, is that the campaigns we work on are very rarely just search now. They have display, they have analytics, they have other elements to the mix as well. And that isn't necessarily always managed by one agency or one team, but it's about the collaboration that you can get between people there that works really well. So what we like to do is work on campaigns where even if we aren't entirely responsible for all aspects of the digital marketing campaign, we have an opportunity to touch into the various people there as well. I think there's another question there as well. This one's from Joe, asking about, in terms of social signals, which are the ones that potentially are the best to be trying including in your campaign. Well, I think you've got to bear in mind that Google have access to Google+, so that's the one that probably is going to have the biggest impact in the short term. But if you're bearing in mind that you're trying to target users, rather than actually kind of just the algorithms, then the argument for Facebook and Twitter becomes much stronger there as well. And also don't forget LinkedIn, because although LinkedIn perhaps isn't as high profile as some of the other websites, if you're dealing at all in B2B, that's probably where your audience is. So you need to think about that question first. So whenever you're trying to perform better in search, it's more and more about thinking about the users first and search engines second, but appreciating that the search engines aren't exactly the same as the users. So if you can understand their approach, so you understand, okay, well, Google don't have access to all of Facebook's data, so therefore my approach to Facebook might change ever so slightly as a consequence of that. That you just need to reflect that, and that tends to be the way that we're doing that there as well. So yeah, well, thanks very much for the questions. I hope this has been a really useful webinar for you here, and I hope that there's been some good key takeaways there as well. I apologise for my voice going a little bit ropey in the middle there. I've never had that before in my life, although I am having a little bit of a coughing fit here, so I do apologise on that front there. But what I will say is if you've got any follow-up questions, you can ask them to myself, Kelvin.Newman on Twitter, or our company account at Site Visibility. Of course, this podcast, this webinar will be up as a video and audio file, so you can share that with your colleagues if they weren't able to watch the video at the moment. And we'll continue to probably have discussions about this in our LinkedIn group as well. So we'll include we'll probably send out an email about the location of that as well, so you can kind of follow up in the LinkedIn group as well. So thanks very much for your time this afternoon. I hope that's answered a few of your questions, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you soon at another future Site Visibility webinar.